nature. But is this true? Or is it merely another superficial, unrealistic, and naively foolish slogan pawned off on gullible teens? Many people, perhaps most, especially among the young, equate love with an emotion. When I was a teenager, I thought I was in love with Becky, and then in order, Susan, Judy, Pamela, and Sandy. I knew I was in love because it felt wonderful to be around them. My heartbeat increased. I even lost my appetite for a time over one of them. During the summer following my senior year in high school, Sandy and I mailed love letters to each other, and I couldn't wait to go to the mailbox to find one. This drove my mother crazy because she rightfully expected me to go out and find a job instead of laying around waiting for the mail. Sandy wrote a lot of poetry, and both of us talked about sharing our lives and growing old together. Now that I've arrived at old, the old part doesn't seem nearly so romantic. As it turned out, it was Carol, not Sandy, that I ended up marrying and growing old with. We've now been married over 41 years, and while there are difficult times in any marriage, we love each other more today than we did when we first got married. How thankful I am for the wonderful wife God has given me. But what is love? Is it a rapid heartbeat, sweaty hands, a loss of appetite? This may seem like a silly question to ask, but what is love? But a lot of heartache exists in this world because people do not know the answer to the question. As with the young lady at Ocean Park, people think love comes naturally and does not need a teacher. But if love does not need a teacher, why is it that so many young people start out in love and end up in bitter disputes, angry accusations, and sometimes in violent outbursts that occasionally lead to physical as well as mental and emotional pain? Maybe it is time to revisit this subject of love and reevaluate its definition. Many would be surprised to know that there is an ancient source that gives us guidance on the meaning of true love. That source is the Bible, and it is the most up-to-date instruction manual in existence when it comes to this subject. One whole chapter is devoted to defining love. It's known as the love chapter. Notice how it is paraphrased in the Living Bible. Love is very patient and kind, never jealous or envious, never boastful or proud, never haughty or selfish or rude. Love does not demand its own way. It is not irritable or touchy. It does not hold grudges and will hardly ever notice when others do it wrong. It is never glad about injustice, but rejoices whenever truth wins out. If you love someone, you will be loyal to him no matter what the cost. While emotion may accompany some aspects of love, here we see that love is defined by the way that we treat others and the way that we react to others. Love requires action on the part of the one showing love. It is not how we feel, but what we do to serve the other person. Love is never self-centered. We at Tomorrow's World define it this way: love is outgoing concern. The young lady's t-shirt with the slogan, "Love does not need a teacher," is wrong. Love does not come naturally. It has to be learned. It needs a teacher. A lawyer once came to Jesus and asked him, "Teacher, which is the great commandment of the law?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Here we learn that love must be directed toward our Maker, the eternal God of creation, and it must be directed toward fellow man. But again, I have to ask, what is love? Do we love God by having warm feelings toward him? Do we love our fellow man by words and feelings, or is something else required? The same book that tells us to love God also tells us what it means to love God. Notice Jesus said, "If you love me, keep my commandments. He who has my commandments and keeps them, it is he who loves me. This should not be difficult to understand. If you have a child, you expect that child that you brought into this world to obey you. Not because you want to run his life, but because you have lived longer and you love him enough that you want him to avoid certain things that will hurt him. It is the same with God. He created us. He knows what is best for us. He loves us and wants us to be happy. And so he gives us his commandments to keep us from being unhappy. And when we obey him, we show respect and love toward him, just as a child shows respect and love toward his parents when he obeys them. This is why the Apostle John confirms what Jesus taught him. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. During the early to mid-Shang dynasty, the people of Israel were slaves in Egypt. About 1444 BCE, God brought catastrophic plagues on Egypt, and by the hand of his prophet Moses, led the slave people to freedom. It was at this time that God taught this new nation his 10 commandments. When we analyze them, we see that the first 4 of the 10 teaches us how to love God. If you are not familiar with these laws, here are the first 4 in abbreviated and paraphrased form. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make any graven images or idols. You shall not take my name lightly or in vain. Remember the 7th day of each week and set it aside for rest and worship. These 4 instruct us on how to show honor and respect toward God. The last 6 commandments teach us the basics of loving our neighbors. You might call this the bare minimum requirements of how to love your neighbor. Notice that none of them focuses on warm, fuzzy feelings. All relate to how we treat other people, beginning with our parents. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And you shall not covet what belongs to your neighbor. I think we can all agree that any society would be better off for keeping these basic commands. Yet they do not come automatically and naturally. Children need to be taught to honor their father and their mother, as the 5th command instructs us. Such admonitions are found throughout the Bible. Notice Proverbs 1, verses 8 and 9. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be graceful ornaments on your head and chains about your neck. Proverbs 23, verse 22 says, listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she is old. And then in the New Testament in Colossians, the 3rd chapter, verse 20, it tells us, children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Notice that the commandment to honor one's parents carries with it a promise. In Ephesians 6, verses 1 and 2, it tells us, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Yes, those who honor and respect parents generally do live longer. They do not get caught up in activities such as the use of illegal drugs, which damage and shorten lives. They avoid unsavory characters which can get them into trouble. In short, they learn valuable lessons from their parents and other elders that keep them from life-threatening situations. And this brings up another point. The Bible shows us that in addition to honoring parents, younger people are to learn to respect elders in general. One way that children and young adults are reminded to do so is found in Leviticus, the 19th chapter, and verse 32. You shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man, and fear your God, I am the Lord. This simple act of younger people standing up when an older person comes into the room is a